My name is Eleanor Whitford, though everyone calls me Nora. I'm 68 years old, and I never imagined that one day I would hear my own name followed by the sentence that sliced the air sharper than a knife. Eleanor is excluded entirely. It happened in a lawyer's office that smelled of polished wood and quiet betrayals. On the table lay the documents of my late husband, Henry Whitford, the man who had built a freight transport empire before his heart betrayed him. Stocks, real estate, several companies, everything the press once called an $84 million legacy. The press likes round numbers. Life doesn't. And it wasn't the lawyer who said those words. It was Madison, my son Oliver's wife. She stood up, rested her manicured hand on the table, and with a razor-sharp smile declared, "Nora is out of the inheritance. It was Henry's final will." People who live on silence and balance sheets froze mid-breath. The lawyer, Logan Gray, stopped flipping papers. My son dropped his eyes. I could almost feel an invisible draft move through the room, cold and thin, like disapproval wrapped in perfume. I've never been one for drama. At my age, you learn that dignity is quieter than outrage. So I straightened my back, gripped my purse, and nodded for them to continue. My heart was hammering, but my mind wasn't. The mind gets tired of panic after enough years of life. Madison never asked questions, she simply announced verdicts. A month before Henry's death, she had started visiting him with what she called a primary asset optimization project. She brought glossy Excel sheets, and Henry, who could begin to forget whether he'd locked the garage, sometimes couldn't tell numbers from their shadows. Those days I made omelets and tried to keep his memory alive with our rituals. Tea at 4, sticky notes on the fridge, old vinyl spinning in the background. Routine can win some battles, but not this one. "Mrs. Whitford," Logan finally cleared his throat. "Please, have a seat. We haven't begun the official reading." "What's there to read?" Madison shrugged theatrically. "Henry redistributed the assets. Oliver is the main beneficiary. I'm the trustee of the restructuring fund. Eleanor, well, the grateful widow. No further details." The grateful widow. I would have laughed if it hadn't stung so precisely. Grateful for what? For the nights in the truck cabin beside Henry when he was afraid to fall asleep after 14 hours of driving? For the greasy diners, the handwritten invoices, the endless miles? For being the one who kept our tiny family business from collapsing while he chased new contracts? I stayed silent, and silence, when chosen, can roar louder than any word. "I'll proceed by protocol," Logan said, pressing record on his dictaphone. "Session in progress." He spoke calmly, as men do who have turned tempests into paperwork. Names, funds, clauses, signatures. Oliver's name repeated often. Mine, rarely, and always in the margins. Right to residence, lifetime medical coverage, funds for charitable initiatives at the discretion of the trustee. That trustee, of course, was Madison. But I've always had one skill: to hear what isn't said. Henry was different from most businessmen. He dreamed not of wealth, but of fairness. And that's why we built something Madison never knew existed. A company registered long ago in my maiden name, before marriage, before the empire. Our little anchor for the storm we always feared might come. The letter lay in my purse, pressing lightly against my wallet. A handwritten note from Henry, dated 4 months before his death, sealed with the stamp of that same company we had founded decades ago. Few people ever saw that seal. It meant trust. "Anything to add, Mrs. Whitford?" Madison's voice snapped me back. "Do you agree with the will?" She didn't know my yet. It's patient, heavy, the kind of silence that waits for its hour. "I only want to add one thing. Henry remembered more than people think, and I have letters to prove it." Logan looked up. He'd known me long before Madison ever wore her first business suit. "We'll review any documents with legal value. Can you provide them?" "Of course," I smiled faintly. "But not here, and not today." Madison's fingers tightened around her designer purse. She was used to fast victories, to final words that actually stayed final. But finality is an illusion for those who've never waited. The reading ended. Logan turned off the recorder. The room exhaled a hush like snow falling on stone. "Well then," Madison's voice sliced through it. "Congratulations, Oliver. Mom, I'll stay and help you handle your daily expenses. You won't need to worry about logistics anymore." Logistics. That was what she called 2 decades of 5 a.m. alarms, fuel logs, repair bills, and truck manifests. Logistics is knowing that speed without direction is just noise. I know how to give direction. "Thank you, Madison," I said evenly. "I'll manage. Oliver, come by tonight. There's something about your father I need to show you. Something he truly wanted preserved." Madison glanced at him like a puppeteer checking her strings. He nodded, and we left. Our house looked smaller that evening. It always does when truth starts echoing off the walls. I set Henry's letter on the kitchen table. "Stay calm, Nora," I told myself. Calm is a strategy. When I called Logan later, he answered on the second ring. "I'll provide the documents," I said, "but I need you to verify one thing for me." "Go ahead." "The addendum they read today. Who drafted it?" "Technically flawless," he admitted. "Substantively, we'll see." Substantively. That's where truth usually hides, between clauses. I opened Henry's letter again. The first line read, "Nora, if you're reading this alone, it's time to act by our rules, not theirs." Below was a list of assets never connected to the Whitford Holdings Group, investments bought quietly under that forgotten company name. The signature line bore my name as sole authorized owner. For 20 years, I hadn't spent a single dollar from it. It was our storm fund, a lifeboat in case the sea turned cruel. And today, the sea had a name. At dusk, the doorbell rang. Oliver stood there, exhausted and hollow-eyed. I saw not the man Madison had polished, but my son, the boy who once followed Henry around the yard, asking how engines worked. "Come in," I said. "We won't talk about money tonight." "Mum," he buried his face in his hands. "I didn't know she'd do this. I thought it was just paperwork." "Paperwork is what you sign on Christmas cards," I said softly. "This is not that." I placed Henry's letter before him. He read it once, then again, and looked up at me as though he'd just realized the ground beneath him had meaning. "It's yours?" "Ours," I said, "until you let someone else decide what you're worth." We sat together as evening stretched its quiet over the yard. Tomorrow would bring a battle, not for money, but for truth. And truth, I've learned, needs calm more than courage. We left at dawn. The road was still half asleep, draped in a gray fog that made every sign look like a memory instead of a direction. Oliver drove in silence, his hands locked tight on the steering wheel. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd spent years in a house with invisible cracks. I watched the horizon through the window, those familiar highway signs. Somerset, Old Ridge, Westfield, names that had once meant invoices and fuel logs, but now felt like ghosts of our early life. "Do you know where we're going?" I asked quietly. "To the old warehouse," he said. "The one you told me about, where it all started." I nodded. "That's right, where everything began. And maybe it can begin again." The building sat at the edge of town, slouched and forgotten, yet somehow still proud. Whitford Logistics, Inc. was painted across its front in faded blue letters, the ones I had brushed on myself with trembling hands 40 years ago. Our first office, our first dream, our first debt. The lock resisted for a second before surrendering. Inside, the air smelled of paper, diesel, and time. Stacks of boxes, shelves with curled invoices, a rusted metal desk that had been Henry's, still standing, as if waiting for him to return. Oliver ran his fingers across the old tabletop. "It feels smaller than I remember," he said. "That's because we were larger then," I answered. I went to the back cabinet and found the safe. The key, that old brass one I had carried since the reading, slid in perfectly. It clicked open with the same low sigh it always had. Inside were two things: a folder of company registration forms and a yellowed business card. Don Haynes. Accountant. I smiled faintly. Of course. Don had been with us from the beginning, a quiet man who spoke through numbers. He knew every invoice by memory, every corner we had cut to survive. After Henry's death, he had moved on to work for Harper and Wells, the legal firm that had conveniently drafted the new will. When Logan told me that, something inside me sharpened. If Madison had an inside man, it was Don, and if he had agreed to help her, it was either out of fear or greed. I found his number. It still started with the same 3 digits, our old area code. He picked up after 2 rings. "Don, it's Nora Whitford." Silence. Then a startled exhale. "Nora. God, it's been years. How are you?" "Alive. Though it seems not everyone wanted that. I need to see you." He hesitated. Then his voice dropped lower. "I work in the city now. Come after lunch, but alone, if possible." We met in a small cafe across from his office, the kind of place where everyone pretends to read newspapers but listens to everyone else's business. Don arrived 10 minutes late, older, thinner, eyes darting around the room like they'd forgotten how to rest. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "They watch everything." "Who's they?" I asked, stirring my coffee. "Your daughter-in-law and her people. They had me alter a file. Henry thought he was signing an insurance update. The signature is his, but the content isn't." I felt a pulse in my temple, slow and cold. "You're certain?" "I made copies," he said, "for my conscience. I couldn't sleep without them." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket, wrapped in an old envelope. "Here, the originals. Don't tell anyone where you got it." "Dawn," I said quietly, "you just did the right thing." He gave a bitter smile. "With people like her, the right thing usually ends badly." Then he left. No coffee, no goodbye. On the drive home, Oliver stared at the flash drive as if it were an unexploded grenade. "If this is real," he said, "she could go to prison." "If it's real," I answered, "she sent herself there the moment she forged that will." We drove in silence the rest of the way, the rain starting halfway home, soft at first, then heavy, drumming on the roof like a warning. I've always believed rain arrives when you've made a decision worth keeping. When we pulled into the driveway, Logan's car was already there. He was waiting on the porch, his coat damp, his face grave. "You won't believe what I found," he said as we stepped inside. The law firm where Don works received a large transfer the day before the new will appeared. The sender's account was registered under Madison's name. I looked at Oliver. His jaw tightened, shame and anger fighting for space on his face. "We have proof," he said quietly, "and we'll use it." I touched his arm. "No, son, you will. This is your family, your legacy. I've had my share of storms. It's your turn to steer." I placed the flash drive next to Henry's letter, both lying like 2 hearts of the same body. "Henry, you always saw the storm before it came. This time, I'll be the one to face it." The next morning, when I woke up, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet soil and possibility. I brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for the man who taught me everything, and let the silence fill the space where fear used to live.
They say time heals all wounds. It doesn't. Time just teaches you how to stand without collapsing. 3 weeks had passed since the day we found the flash drive. Enough time for the shock to fade and for purpose to take its place. Oliver had grown quieter, more deliberate, a man who finally understood that silence can be a weapon and words a shield. Madison, meanwhile, acted as though nothing had happened. Her social media was still filled with smiling photos, business dinners, charity galas, white wine, and chandeliers. People like her believe that if they look perfect long enough, truth will forget where to find them. The court date was set for Monday morning. I arrived early, dressed in a gray coat Henry once said made me look like a general. Not beautiful, not fragile, just solid. Old age doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's armor. When Madison entered the courtroom, I almost didn't recognize her. The same confident walk, but her eyes, they had the tired gleam of someone who'd been rehearsing innocence and wasn't sure she remembered her lines. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, Oliver beside me. His hand brushed mine, trembling slightly. "Mom," he whispered, "if this goes wrong—" "Shh," I said. "If truth is with us, even silence will speak." The judge entered. Black robe, steady eyes, a man who looked like he'd seen every kind of lie and still believed in evidence. "Case number 468, Whitford versus Whitford," the clerk announced. Madison's lawyer went first, sleek, rehearsed, with the kind of voice that sounds like it practices in mirrors. His words were elegant, meaningless. Then Logan stood. He didn't bother with theatrics. "Your Honor," he said simply, "we have an audio and video recording of Mr. Henry Whitford signing the alleged document. We ask that it be played in full." A ripple of whispers rolled through the courtroom. The judge nodded. The speakers came to life with a soft crackle. Paper rustled, then Henry's voice. Warm, familiar, a sound I hadn't heard in months. "This is the insurance update, right, Dawn?" Then a pause. Dawn's voice, hesitant, barely steady. "Yes, Mr. Whitford, just standard paperwork." But the camera, the tiny webcam built into the laptop, had captured the screen. The document wasn't an insurance update. It was the altered will. Gasps, then absolute silence. That heavy courtroom silence that has its own gravity. Madison froze. Her lawyer reached for words that wouldn't come. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitford, do you acknowledge this evidence?" Madison's lips trembled. I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought it was routine." And that was the moment I looked at her, not as my enemy, but as a woman who'd lost herself to greed and was just now realizing the cost. "Madison, money doesn't save you when there's nothing left inside." The judge's decision was swift and clear. The addendum was invalid, the original will restored. No applause, just the quiet sound of justice doing its job. Outside, the sun was blinding, the kind of light that feels like a clean page. Oliver turned to me, eyes glassy. "Mom, I don't even know what to say." "Say thank you." "Not to me, to your father. He planned for this." I reached into my bag and handed him the envelope Henry had left. "Now it's yours, not for courtrooms, for your heart." He opened it and read, "Oliver, if you're reading this, it means your mother did the right thing. Remember, money is just fuel. Life is the road. When it gets dark, follow the light she carries." He stood there, silent, the paper shaking in his hands, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift from both of us. Madison disappeared quietly after that. No headlines, no drama, just absence. I didn't wish her harm. I only wished her reflection in the mirror someday showed her the truth she'd tried to bury. Because justice isn't noise, it's balance. That evening, I brewed tea and stepped out into the garden. The apple trees were heavy with fruit. I touched the rough bark and whispered, "We made it, Henry. You'd be proud." Oliver joined me a moment later. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence was full. Not of loss, but of peace. And peace, I realized, is the only inheritance worth fighting for.
3 weeks have passed since the trial. The house finally breathes again. Not with fear, not with waiting, but with the quiet that follows a storm. For the first time in years, silence felt like company instead of punishment. I cleared the dining table of every paper, every trace of law, leaving only one thing: Henry's letter. Its edges were frayed now, the ink fading slightly, but it still carried his steadiness. That letter was never about money or instructions. It was about freedom, his way of telling me it was safe to stop fighting. This morning, I walked to the post office. The sky was clear, the air cold enough to wake the skin. Even the street signs seemed new, as if someone had washed the years off them overnight. In my mailbox, a single envelope waited. No return address, just my name, Nora Whitford, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. Inside was a photograph. Henry and I, young again, standing beside our first truck. Behind us, the painted sign, Whitford Logistics. On the back, in pencil, a few words. What we built was always bigger than money. If you're reading this, it means the tree has survived. I smiled. It couldn't have been from Henry, not literally, but maybe from someone who knew us, who remembered. Or maybe from the world itself, a quiet nod from the universe that keeps score in ways accountants never can. Oliver comes by more often now. He helps me with the garden, repairs the fence, brews coffee that's almost as good as mine. We don't talk about courtrooms or betrayal. We talk about beginnings, about his plan to reopen a smaller, honest branch of the business. Something real, something Dad would recognize. And I believed him. In his gestures, his tone, I saw the same calm determination that once kept Henry's hands steady on the wheel. Maybe that's how legacies really live, not in signatures, but in the rhythm of the people who remain. Last week, I got another call from the children's center Henry and I used to support. They'd finished building a new wing, funded by what was left in the trust, and they wanted to name it after him, the Henry Whitford Foundation. They asked if I would come to plant the first tree in the courtyard. I said yes. When I arrived, the children were laughing, chasing each other with watering cans. The young tree stood in the middle, fragile but upright. I watched as they poured water at its roots and sunlight touched the leaves. And I thought, this is what lasts. Not wealth, not victory. The act of giving life forward. That evening, back home, the sun dipped behind the hills, leaving a golden stripe across the sky. My teapot whistled in the kitchen, the same old one that had learned the language of patience. I stepped outside, cup in hand. The old apple tree swayed gently in the wind. Beside it, the new one, the sapling Oliver and I planted after the verdict. I ran my hand along its bark and whispered, "You see, Henry, we didn't just survive, we're growing." The leaves rustled like laughter, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone waiting for life to happen. I felt like part of it again. Because sometimes the greatest victories are quiet, and the richest inheritance isn't written in wills, but in the peace that comes when you finally stop needing to prove your worth.